Today we're stepping into a new series, as you know, and I'm really excited about this one, my friends. For those of you who have been here through our autumn exploration of the elements and our winter of refuge, you might have sensed a kind of preparing the ground in the themes that we've been exploring. And of course, last time we paused to take in some lessons from spring about emergence and growth. And those are also going to serve us well as we move into this new territory. But now we are moving into a different season, so symbolically and literally. And that means that over the next 7 or 8 sessions, which will take us through most of the spring and summer, we're going to be exploring what are called the Six Paramitas. And these are a set of teachings from the Buddhist tradition that describe in practical, lived terms qualities of being that shape both our inner climate and how we show up in the world. So I'm going to preview them for you now. These qualities are generosity, wholeness, patience, joyful engagement, meditation, and wisdom. And we will, of course, spend much more time diving into each of them in the sessions ahead. But today, I want to spend maybe a little more time than usual reflecting on the roots of this teaching. So where it comes from, the Buddhist lineage and language, and then lay some foundation for the way that we're going to work with them here, okay? And I want to start by exploring the word paramita itself, in part because I have a little beef, I guess you might say, with the most common translation. So I'm going to say some more about that in a minute. But also because I think that when properly understood, this word translates in a very meaningful and evocative way. Paramita comes from Sanskrit, and like many Sanskrit or Pali words, it doesn't translate super neatly into English, especially in like a one-to-one way. You know, this word means that word. So there are a couple different ways that paramita's roots are understood. One focuses on the root parama, which means something like highest or supreme. You can think of the word paramount there, okay? And so there's going to be more to come on that. But the translation that I most appreciate comes from understanding the components of this word. So we have para, meaning other shore, and ita, meaning gone or gone to. So in this way of understanding paramita, it means gone to the other shore. I love that translation because it invites us to relate to this teaching as a river crossing. And using this image, there is the shore on which we stand now, here. So in all our humanness, with its conditioning, habits, confusions, you know, all the ordinary and messy moments of being alive, and we know this shore pretty well. And there is another shore, which we might understand not as some distant, unreachable place. In fact, we can sometimes glimpse it from where we stand now. But this other side of the river represents the possibility of living with greater presence, openness, compassion, freedom. So in other words, embodying the fullness of our Buddha nature. And in some Buddhist teachings, they speak about the other shore as nirvana, okay? And the paramitas are the qualities that help us make that crossing. So not a set of standards to reach or any kind of checklist, but as sources of support that taken together might serve as a kind of raft that can carry us as we navigate across the river. And we can think of that river as just the ever-flowing circumstances of life. Now, just briefly, if you've done prior study on Buddhism, you may have encountered a slightly different version of this teaching. So the tree of Buddhism, if you will, has several branches. And one branch is known as the Theravada tradition, which includes 10 paramis rather than 6 paramitas. And that's worth noting, not to get academic about it, but simply to say that we are choosing one of several valid maps of the same terrain. So we will be working with a map that comes from the Mahayana branch. And that isn't because it's truer or better in any way, but because its framing of these qualities fits most naturally with where we find ourselves in the seasonal arc of our practice. We had our autumn with the elements, and we had our winter of refuge. And these series had a more inward kind of quality of resourcing and steadying and preparing the ground. And the paramitas are going to build on that foundation. So they are anchored inwardly, and they also have this explicitly outward quality. So describing how practice expresses itself in relationship, in action, and in how we meet the world around us. So kind of the way that spring and summer foster more outwardly visible growth. This series is going to do the same. And it's part of why I thought it was a good fit for us right now. So the reason that the Mahayana framing has this outward quality is because in that tradition, the paramitas are described as the bodhisattva's path. So we've spoken about that term, bodhisattvas, before, but just as a reminder, a bodhisattva is someone who aspires to wake up, not only for themselves, but in service of all beings. And I'm really touched by this image of the bodhisattva, not as someone who simply builds a raft and crosses to the other shore and heads off into the sunset to enjoy nirvana, but as someone who is committed to continuing to navigate these waters in a way that can support others in learning to cross the river too. So these paramitas are the qualities that a bodhisattva cultivates in service of that compassionate mission. And one more thing about the word paramita itself before we move on. I want to name directly why I am not using the most common English translation, which is perfection. I understand and I respect how this translation came to be widely accepted. So as I mentioned, it's drawn from parama, meaning highest or supreme, which could be interpreted as perfect. No ill intention, certainly, in that interpretation. And for me personally, and I suspect for others, and I know there are many of us in our modern times who have grappled in some way with perfectionism. The word perfection has the potential to load this teaching with all kinds of baggage that could make it harder to really relate to and access. And I'm saying this from my own experience. When I first encountered the paramitas, they were described to me as the 6 perfections. And I noticed that something in me braced a little, even before I knew a lot about them. So as I've spoken about here before, I spent years, honestly, most of my life, driven pretty mercilessly by my own perfectionism. And that showed up in my work, and it showed up in my relationships, and it even showed up in my spiritual practice. So for me, striving towards perfection involves a particular kind of effort that is uniquely exhausting and yet somehow always not quite good enough. And this is why I see a benefit in approaching these teachings in a different way. If we were embarking on a journey through the 6 perfections, It might even subtly come with a sense of pressure or the idea that there's a right way and a wrong way to go about this, and almost by definition be seen as a little out of reach. So, like, that shore, the perfect one, is so far from where I'm standing that there's no way I'm ever going to get there. And if I was going to cross that body of water between me and perfection, it might look more like a really tumultuous ocean than a river. And considering how harrowing it sounds to take a raft across the ocean, we might decide that it's better just to stay where we are, right? Or we might slip into another very natural human tendency and look at this list of qualities and start to audit ourselves against it. Like, how generous am I really? How patient? How wise? And then conclude that there's so much work to be done. And before we know it, we could get lost in that familiar trance of unworthiness, as my teacher, Tara Brach, would say. So here's the thing, and this is really important. This might be the ground beneath this whole series. These are not qualities that we need to manufacture or achieve or earn. I'm going to say that again. These are not qualities that we need to manufacture or achieve or earn. And blessedly, the Buddhist tradition points to something far more organic than that, if we really look. So you may remember in our last spring session, we touched briefly on the teaching of Tathāgatagarbha, that mouthful that means the Buddha seed, which teaches that the capacity for full awakening is not something we work towards creating, but it is something that is already present in us. It comes pre-installed by default, we might say. And Thich Nhat Hanh describes our deeper consciousness as a garden. And it's an image that really works here. So I'm going to read you a passage from his writing on this. I'm going to read it slowly, and I'm going to invite you to really open to what he's saying here. The store consciousness is often described as the earth, the garden where the seeds that give rise to flowers and fruits are sown. The mind consciousness is the gardener, the one who sows, waters, and takes care of the earth. If it sows wheat seeds, we grow wheat. The gardener has to trust the earth, because it is the earth that brings forth the fruit of understanding and compassion. The flower of awakening, understanding, and love is a gift from the garden. The gardener only has to take good care of the garden in order for the flower to grow. I find this such a powerful way of expressing that the seeds we need to grow the qualities of awakening and these qualities of the Six Paramitas are already in us, okay? So not in some people and not others, in every one of us. And what practice does is creates the conditions under which those seeds can actually grow. We are tending the garden, and we are the garden. So the practice of these paramitas will be less like construction and more like cultivation. As a good gardener knows, or so I hear. I'm not a good gardener. But spring taught us in our last session, the seed already holds the blueprint. And our task is not to engineer the growing. Our task is to tend. So to clear what is crowding or compacting the soil, to bring what nourishes, and to watch over the garden with care and with attentiveness and without grasping or forcing, responding to the conditions that arise as best we can. And I have learned, often the hard way, because that seems to be my thing, that the perfectionistic orientation towards perfection, getting it right, tends to compact the very soil that I hope to cultivate. So when we approach practice as a project of self-improvement, when we are always monitoring ourselves for some kind of progress, if we're measuring ourselves against an image of what being more, in this case, more patient, more generous, more wise would look like, something tightens right away, and that inner ground becomes hard. And what is inherent and wanting to grow in us has a much harder time finding its way up. So not striving to be more generous, but asking, what is making it harder for generosity to come forward? Not pushing myself to be more patient. I've tried a lot of that. Doesn't work so well, I promise you that. But if I can get more curious about what conditions would allow the steadiness that's already in me to become more available, that is a completely different orientation to practice. And I find it a great deal more friendly and fruitful. Okay? So instead of perfections, I'm inviting us to hold these paramitas as liberating practices, not standards that we're going to work towards achieving, but qualities that help us navigate the river of life with more steadiness and more wisdom and more care. Not because there's anything wrong with where we are on this shore, but because the practice creates the conditions in which the most wise and loving seeds already in us can grow. So as we're orienting today, I'm going to offer just a little deeper glimpse into each of these 6 qualities. So not a full teaching. We're going to save that for the sessions to come. But I want to give you enough to get a felt sense of the territory we're entering. The first quality is dana, or generosity. And this is not the generosity only of things given, but the generosity of presence, of attention, of letting go sometimes. So it's this quality of an open hand and an open heart. The second is sila, or wholeness, sometimes also referred to as ethical conduct. And here we don't mean rule following, but it's more about alignment. Living in a way that doesn't create harm or division in ourselves or in our relationships or the wider world. So this is about ethics as a form of integrity, so of being whole. Third quality is ksanti, which can be translated as patience or sometimes inclusiveness. So this is not a passive endurance, but a spacious willingness to receive what's difficult without contracting around it. That capacity to stay present to the pace of things as they are, and to make room for what we might otherwise want to push away. Fourth quality is virya, and the translation we're going to work with is joyful engagement. So not a grim determination, or forcing our way through. But the kind of energy that flows naturally from alignment and love. Effort that feels alive, maybe even light, like being drawn towards what matters. And so we can think about the bee that we talked about last time. That's a really good embodied kind of example of virya. Fifth quality, dhyana, which is meditation or contemplation. So we're familiar with this one. This is the practice of turning inward, but not as an escape. It's more like the ground from which wise action arises. So this is the quality of a mind that can settle, and from that settling, see more clearly. And the sixth final quality is prajna, or wisdom. Here we don't mean accumulated knowledge, but more like a capacity to see clearly in this moment and respond with care. So this is wisdom as something lived rather than something we possess. So these six qualities are sometimes presented as a sequence. So as though we kind of move through them one by one. Maybe we graduate from generosity to wisdom like rungs on a ladder. That's not how I understand or experience them. And so it's not going to be how we work with them here. These qualities enrich one another. So I see them arising together because real generosity requires wisdom, right? Like true patience is a form of engagement. Meditation opens into like an ethical clarity. So I see the paramitas more like a living ecosystem than a staircase. And each one supports and enriches the other. And altogether, these paramitas describe a way of being in the world that is awake and responsive and genuinely oriented towards the well-being of the whole. So as we step over this threshold together today, we are going to begin exactly where we are. With these seeds in whatever stage they may be at in us, so dormant, maybe just starting to sprout, maybe they're already well developed above ground. We don't need to make anything happen here. And I will emphasize again, this is not about grading ourselves in any way. We just need to be willing to tend. And what we are practicing is the art of cultivating conditions. So softening the inner ground. Recognizing slowly what's in the way of growth. And allowing what's already here to become more fully visible. And when we do this, we can trust that that crossing of the river is already underway. So as we turn towards our practice today, we're going to bring these six qualities into our awareness, not to evaluate them or ourselves, but simply to let them land and notice what the body has to say in response. So there's nothing to figure out or get right. We are just learning to listen. And that willingness to listen is how the tending begins, okay? So let's practice, my friends. I know I've had a lot of words to say, so please care for your body. Whatever you need to prepare for a period of stillness. And when you're ready, finding a posture that feels both awake and grounded. And as you settle into your posture, you might allow the eyes to close, soften the gaze. And we will begin by simply noticing that the body is breathing. Without changing anything about it. Just really tuning into that symphony of sensations and movement that are your breath. Letting every breath be a new experience. So this breath, what's it like? And this one, allowing the breath to support you in collecting the attention. So on the inhale, an opening, a receiving. And on the exhale, softening, releasing. You might notice the weight of the body resting on the chair or the floor. And sense that beneath that surface is the vastness of our larger body. Miles of earth and water and stone. And experimenting with how fully you can soften into that support. Letting yourself be held. And as you rest here, inviting you to reflect on the 6 qualities of the Paramitas, and I will remind you of them. So not thinking about or evaluating them or yourself, just simply letting them land in your awareness, perhaps silently repeating them, and paying attention to anything that comes up in the body or the heart as you receive them. Generosity, the open hand and open heart. Wholeness, living in alignment with what you value. patience, the capacity to stay and to include what's difficult. Joyful engagement, energy that flows from aliveness rather than obligation. Contemplation, the quality of turning inward and becoming still enough to see. Wisdom, the capacity to meet this moment and respond with care. And now, without needing to analyze or conclude anything, widening the attention and listening. Perhaps one of these qualities resonated more strongly. Perhaps some felt foreign or distant. Inviting the body to speak in whatever way. Could be a sensation, an image, an emotion. Trusting that the seeds of each are already planted in you. And simply softening the soil and listening as a way of tending. And in these last moments of our practice, just letting go of any doing, any tending, and just resting as the garden itself. We'll close with a poem by Marge Percy. Under a sky the color of pea soup, she is looking at her work, growing away there, actively, thickly, like grapevines or pole beans, as things grow in the real world, slowly enough. If you tend them properly, if you mulch, if you water, if you provide birds that eats insects a home and winter food, if the sun shines and you pick off caterpillars, if the praying mantis comes and the ladybugs and the bees, then the plants flourish, but at their own internal clock. Connections are made slowly. Sometimes they grow underground. You cannot always tell by looking what is happening. More than half the tree is spread out in the soil under your feet. Penetrate quietly as the earthworms that blow no trumpet. Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the tree. Spread like the squash plant that overruns the garden. Gnaw in the dark and use the sun to make sugar. Weave real connections. Create real nodes. Build real houses. Live a life you can endure. Make love that is loving. Keep tangling and interweaving and taking more in. A thicket and bramble wilderness to the outside, but to us, interconnected with rabbit runs and burrows and layers. Live as if you liked yourself, and it may happen. Reach out, keep reaching out, keep bringing in. This is how we are going to live for a long time. Not always. For every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes. So taking your time as you emerge from this practice, you might invite a little movement into the body, maybe some deeper, fuller breaths, opening your eyes at your own pace. Thank you for your practice.